Welcome to our channel. Let's begin the journey.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into Module 3, Lecture 6, The Invisible Assassins, Xenon-135 and Reactor Poisons. We're going to explore this hidden, absolute high-stakes battle, unfolding deep inside the core of every single operating nuclear reactor. It's essentially a microscopic war of action and counter-reaction. The very act of generating immense power unleashes these, invisible assassins that desperately want to kill the reaction. We're looking at the fascinating physics of fission fragments, specifically Xenon-135, and the frankly terrifying concept of reactor dead time. Let's get right to it. Okay, let's dive into this. As we know, the whole foundation of nuclear power rests on one incredibly violent event: nuclear fission. A heavy nucleus, like uranium-235, absorbs a slow-moving neutron, gets completely unstable, and literally tears itself apart. This violent rupture releases free neutrons and a massive amount of kinetic energy. We're talking about 200 mega-electron volts per atom. It's a yield that absolutely dwarfs any chemical reaction. But, the story doesn't end with that energy release. The central mystery we really need to focus on today is the aftermath. What exactly happens to the broken, jagged pieces left behind in the wake of that violently split atom? Well, an atom doesn't just split cleanly in half into the exact same pieces every single time. Actually, the physics are highly chaotic. A single splitting uranium-235 atom can fragment in dozens of different ways. Ultimately, it generates a dizzying array of over 200 different highly unstable radioactive fragments. So this isn't just inert ash sitting quietly in the fuel rods. No, this is a violently unstable chemical soup. These broken pieces, they're known as the fallout fragments. Typically, when the uranium atom fractures, it produces specific pairs of intermediate mass isotopes. We're talking about heavy elements here, things like barium and krypton, antimony and niobium, or xenon and strontium. And because they're born out of this totally violent, neutron-rich fission event, these fragments are highly radioactive. They immediately begin undergoing continuous beta decay. Basically, they're shooting out electrons and transforming their very elemental identity step by step down a decay chain, all in a desperate race to reach a stable state. But here's the kicker. A few of these fragments aren't just radioactive. They are actively hostile to the reactor's survival. In nuclear physics, we literally call them reactor poisons. These are specific fission products that possess absolutely massive neutron absorption cross-sections. In simpler terms, they act like giant microscopic sponges, or invisible assassins, greedily absorbing the free thermal neutrons bouncing around the core. And since those free neutrons are the absolute lifeblood needed to trigger the next uranium atom and sustain the whole nuclear chain reaction, these poisons threaten to starve the reactor to death. To understand how engineers fight this, we really need to compare the two most notorious assassins side by side, Xenon-135 and Samarium-149. Xenon is our fast-acting killer. It's produced directly from fission, but mostly from the beta decay of iodine-135. Now, xenon has an unimaginably massive thermal neutron absorption cross-section of 2 million barns, which, by the way, is basically the physicist's way of measuring how incredibly huge of a target it presents to passing neutrons. It is arguably the most powerful neutron thief in existence. Samarium, on the other hand, is more of a slow-creeping threat. It's born from the decay of Promethium-149, and it has a smaller, yet still highly problematic, absorption rate of 40,000 barns. So xenon hits fast and hard, while samarium is a slow, insidious drain on the core's reactivity. And this brilliantly illustrates that xenon battle in real time. Right after a reactor powers up, as the uranium splits, iodine-135 builds up and decays into xenon. You can clearly see the negative reactivity plummeting downwards as the poison accumulates. However, because the reactor is running, the massive flux of neutrons is actually burning up the xenon into stable xenon-136, almost as fast as it's being made. So the curves eventually flatten out, reaching a delicate equilibrium roughly 40 to 50 hours after the power increase. The reactor creates the poison, sure, but the reactor's power also destroys it, keeping the assassin right at bay. Now, as long as the reactor stays running at a steady power level, that equilibrium holds. But the narrative takes a really dark turn when we look at the greatest danger in reactor operations. The true crisis begins when the reactor attempts to shut down and go to sleep. We call this the reactor's shutdown trap. Just look at this massive, terrifying spike right after a shutdown. The exact moment the control rods drop and the reactor powers down, the neutron flux drops virtually to zero. That means the reactor completely stops burning up the xenon poison. But, and this is a huge but, the parent isotope, iodine-135, is still sitting inside the fuel rods. It has a half-life of 6.6 hours, so it just keeps decaying, continuously pumping fresh xenon-135 into a core that can no longer destroy it. The poison concentration absolutely skyrockets, utterly choking the core with negative reactivity and peaking right around 9 hours after shutdown. This creates incredibly dramatic stakes for the operators. If a reactor trips offline and they can't clear the fault and pull the rods within the first hour or two, they're caught in the trap. It takes 80 to 90 agonizing hours for that massive xenon spike to naturally decay away into cesium. This waiting period is known as reactor dead time. For nearly 4 days, operators are physically locked out by the physics of the core. Listen, they could pull every single control rod completely out of the reactor and it still wouldn't restart. The reactor has essentially poisoned itself to sleep, and the invisible assassin is in total control. Let's move on and see how this compares to our second core assassin, samarium-149. After a fresh core startup, samarium doesn't spike aggressively like xenon. Instead, we see this slow, relentless 400-hour climb to its equilibrium value. Because samarium's absorption cross-section is smaller, it doesn't burn out as quickly. This results in a continuous heavy layer of negative reactivity that just drags down the core's efficiency over weeks of operation. Now, what's genuinely fascinating about this is how samarium behaves when the reactor goes to sleep. Unlike xenon, which aggressively spikes and then finally decays away over 90 hours, samarium is a stable isotope. When the reactor shuts down, the burning stops, but the parent promethium-149 just keeps decaying into samarium. The poison builds up to a new, higher peak, and then it just stays there, indefinitely. It is a creeping, permanent threat that sits in the dark core, patiently waiting for the operators to restart the reactor before it can finally begin to be burned away again. So, with all this going against us, how do humans possibly fight back against these relentless microscopic saboteurs? Well, the engineering solution is something called excess reactivity. This is the vital surplus reactivity intentionally built into a fresh core. Think of it as the extra fuel power loaded into the reactor way above and beyond what is strictly required to reach criticality at zero power. Engineers absolutely must arm the reactor with enough excess reactivity to fight through the xenon equilibrium, power through the creeping samarium, and still have enough leftover energy to keep the lights on as the fissile material slowly burns away over the years. Defeating these assassins requires some brilliant, long-term strategic countermeasures. Core designers triumph by meticulously mapping and predicting these excess reactivity curves months in advance. Because they can't just load infinite excess reactivity, that would be incredibly dangerous to control, they have to carefully pace it. They schedule deliberate outages and outsmart the poisons by reloading the fuel in 3 to 4 staggered batches. In a typical pressurized water reactor, they'll replace about 60 fuel assemblies each cycle. This staggering means a typical fuel assembly stays in the core, battling poisons and generating power for 3 full cycles. That's roughly 4.5 years of continuous microscopic warfare. So, the crucial point here is this. A nuclear reactor core isn't just a static piece of machinery or some simple boiler. It is a profoundly delicate, living, breathing ecosystem. Every single burst of energy you extract from a splitting atom breeds a dark, invisible counterreaction. You literally cannot have the massive 200 MeV energy release without also birthing the very fallout fragments that immediately turn right around and try to choke the reaction to death. Which leaves us looking at the sheer awe-inspiring balance required to harvest nuclear fission. We build these massive steel and concrete fortresses, but the true battle happens on the atomic scale, managed by precise mathematics and careful patience. If a reactor actively creates its own worst enemies the exact moment it powers up, it kind of makes you wonder, who is really in control here? Is it the brilliant engineers charting the curves, or is it the invisible assassins dictating the fundamental rules of the core? Definitely something to think about next time you flip on a light switch. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.
The view from here is breathtaking. Command, we are in position and ready for the next phase. If you liked the video, subscribe and comment the topic you want next. Thanks for watching, and stay unstoppable.